Okay. Thank you, Roger, and welcome to everybody tonight to our MES webinar and our guest speaker, Dr. Avalon Owens. Avalon is, there's something very inspiring about her story to me, and that I want all of you to think about. Avalon grew up in Idaho, never saw a firefly till she was in college, and also wasn't really excited about insects as a kid. I think a lot of people I know in MES really got into them when they were kids. And what's really cool is she took a course in her undergraduate college days, in part to as sort of exposure therapy, desensitization therapy, and entomology. And from there, she just took off and got her master's in Taiwan, where the insects are more voluminous and diverse, and then her doctorate at Tufts, and for all 8 years of that postgrad work, focused on fireflies, which is just so cool. So those of you who are teachers, just remember, you never know the influence you're going to have and who's going to take off from these chance encounters. So Allison is currently a research fellow at the Rowland Lab at Harvard University and is the head of her lab group and her lab research group, and has switched her focus to moths and lights and the flight to light behavior of moths, and is going to be drawing on that research as well as her prior research for tonight's talk. Something I learned about Avalon too is that although she's based in Massachusetts, she is coming to Maine this summer to do research and has been looking for a pristine night sky to look at what moths do when they're not being impacted by our modern lighting technology. And so she'll be up in Lakeville, and she's going also to work with Angela Meck from UMO. I don't know if she's on tonight, but they're going to replicate a 1931 historic moth survey in the same place it was done almost 100 years ago. So I am very excited to hear from Avalon, and I know you all are too. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Owens.
Thank you.
Let me just say before we get started, Avalon, would you prefer questions at the end or as they come up?
Yeah, let's just do them as they come up. You know, it's kind of casual.
Okay.
Got a good group here, so yeah.
What I'll say to people is then put any questions you have in the chat, and Kathy and I will monitor the chat and ask questions when the appropriate time comes. Okay.
Great. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Oops.
Oh, it's
I'm not.
loading.
For some reason, I'm seeing Anna Court's screen
You're viewing
instead of
Anna Court.
Avalon's screen.
Yeah, let's see.
So Roger, if you could.
There we go.
Okay, try now, Avalon. There you go.
There we go. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. Yes, I'm Avalon. I run a lab down in Cambridge, where we're very interested in sort of at a high level, interested in how light plays a role in nature and how how animals see and how they live, and then the impacts of humans on these dynamics and how the way that we interfere with the way things look and are illuminated, how the impacts of this for ecology and evolution. So that's like a very big picture. Most of my work focuses on insects. Historically, I've done a lot with fireflies. We're working with moths now, but all of the research is driven by conservation, you know, this idea that we want to understand these systems and we want to keep them around for future generations. So there's sort of two angles with which I come at this question. For my adult life, I've spent a lot of time thinking about light pollution, which a lot of people don't really think about this, in terms of, environmental threats that we worry about, I wouldn't say light pollution is like high on most people's lists. And it wasn't high on mine either growing up. I never really thought about it. And hopefully today I can convince you that we should think about it. It is very important. And that it's this sort of growing environmental threat that it's really urgent that we start to pay attention to. Also, on the other side of things, insects do not appear to be doing very well. There's a lot of research coming out showing insect declines in many places around the globe, across many orders of insects, with diverse studies, different authors, all finding the same sort of a thing, which is that there don't seem to be as many insects around as there used to be. And this is very concerning, not only for entomologists who love insects, but for all of us who enjoy, living, surviving, having crops to eat, not getting overtaken by, well, anyway, they're very, very important. And having birds, birds eat insects and so forth. And so as this stuff has come out, we've all become very interested in figuring out what exactly is going on. And so many insect conservationists spend a lot of time thinking about the causes of insect declines. And Dave Wagner put together this very beautiful piece going into the various things that threaten insects, of which there are many. And this splash image is just sort of at the beginning of the paper, a sort of visual representation of the top threats to insects. While Dave does discuss light pollution in this paper, it's interesting to me that it does not make it to the splash image. It's not really featured here. You could argue that it's a type of urbanization shown here, but I think I'm going to maybe convince you in the next several minutes that it's a sort of narrow way of thinking about it. And there's something else about this image that strikes me as a little funny, which is the insects represented on it are also sort of, there's something missing. And from this image as well, this is a paper that came out around the same time when everybody was writing about insect declines. It's called Declines in Insect Abundance and Diversity. We Know Enough to Act Now. And this is one of those classic images of insect diversity. We can all look at this and be like, yes, wow, what an amazing group. I love these things. But even images like this, there tends to be a lot of bias. And in particular, when I look at this spread, I'm struck by the fact that out of all the insects shown here, only 2 or maybe 3 are nocturnal. You've got your firefly, you've got your Luna moth. There's a couple of nebulous things, but in general, this is showing insects that are active during the day. So it might surprise you to learn that 60% of insects are active at night. The majority of insects are active at night, and yet they don't get a lot of press attention. Similar to why light pollution doesn't get a lot of press attention. It's just sort of going on without us noticing. Well, that sort of gives away where I'm going with this talk, but I want to like walk us through it sort of more methodically to answer this question of why is it that we don't really talk about light pollution as a threat to insects. There are several reasons this could be. It might just not be a very widespread issue. So reports of insect declines come from all over the globe, from very remote areas and very urban areas, all sorts of places. And so you could maybe argue that light pollution is sort of only affects a few places very seriously. That is, of course, not true. So to understand that, let's talk a little bit about what light pollution actually is. So this is a nice schematic put out by Nat Geo, showing this is what we would call a point source of artificial light: a street light, a window, a headlight, a billboard, could be anything. And that light casts a sort of zone of illumination somewhere within its local area. And so everything here gets lit up quite a lot. But also this light will bounce off of surfaces, or sometimes it sort of leaks upward directly, goes up into the atmosphere, it gets bounced around, and it becomes what we call sky glow, which is this sort of general diffuse illumination. It's brighter when it's cloudier out, and it sort of creates this hazy glow over cities that prevents people from seeing the stars, among other things. And this light, this sky glow, is detectable from space. You can view it using images taken by a satellite. And looking at these images, you can see, light coming from Las Vegas doesn't stay in Las Vegas. It actually moves quite a bit outward into the surrounding habitat. And you can build models from images like this to get a sense of how exposed different areas are to different levels of light pollution. Those models look like this. So here on this map, everything that's sort of green, yellow, orange, red, or gray, that represents increasingly severe levels of light pollution. So here's Boston, where I am, where you can see like 2 stars at night. It's quite bad. Blue, gray, and black, these are more natural levels. And Maine, as far as the East Coast goes, Maine is about as good as it gets in terms of pristine night skies. But even, down here in the South, there are a lot of more light polluted areas. And in general, the Eastern US is really, really light polluted. This, I think, is startling to many people who view light pollution as kind of like a city problem. But it is really widespread. And even a map like this, scary as it is, sort of underrepresents the situation, because this was built from satellite imagery. And so it's built on measurements of light pollution taken from space, but not all light makes it into space. So local light sources like these lit windows in one of my field sites, shielded streetlights, lots of kinds of light don't make it up into the sky, and yet still radically transform the habitats of nocturnal insects, such as fireflies, moths, and other things. So I don't think it's fair to say that light pollution is not widespread. I didn't show a global map, but many places look very similar to the US. Europe and the UK especially are like wildly light polluted, Asia as well. So there's quite a widespread issue. Well, you might argue it's not pervasive enough. And what I mean by that is many of the scariest reports of insect declines come from nature reserves or protected areas, places that are, in theory, not being impacted by human development in any way. So there's this study out of Germany that gained a lot of attention, where the authors put these flight intercept traps in natural areas, monitored them over at various times over around 30 years, and found a 75% decline in insect biomass. And that's really scary. And you might look at this and say, well, I mean, this light pollution couldn't have anything to do with this, right? Look how natural this place is. And yet, many of their sample sites, which are plotted on this map with little triangles, are actually in pretty heavily light polluted areas. So there might not be a street light in the middle of the site, but there's a lot of sky glow overhead, a lot of light leaking in. And other studies have shown that protected areas, while they don't tend to have light necessarily coming from the middle, a lot of it leaks in from the edges. And if they're small fragments, they can be very heavily light polluted. So light pollution can sort of leak into natural habitats from cities. It also sometimes is literally just in the middle of natural habitats. So oil and gas drilling operations are a good example of this. Having hung out in national parks at night, wandering around, you'll see all sorts of random light sources, buildings, facilities, random things. You're not even sure what it's for, and they'll be left on all night for no reason. This is something I see a lot. The US-Mexico border wall is another great example. Like, there's no human development here besides the wall, and yet it's lit up 24/7 with these very bright lights, right? And even in the most pristine areas, so this is a false color image of the sky in Chaco Culture National Historical Park in New Mexico, where the color of the image corresponds to how bright it is. And so you can see the Milky Way appearing in this nice green. There it is. When I give this talk to people, sometimes they haven't seen the Milky Way before. I bet many of you have. But just in case, thought I'd point it out. And so this is all of the light in the sky visible from this National Historical Park, which I might add, the Park Service has specifically committed to making as pristine as possible when it comes to dark skies, because the ancestral Pueblo peoples had a really strong relationship with the night sky. And so there's this cultural value to it. But they can't do everything. It turns out if you subtract out all of the natural light in the night sky, you're left with a bunch of unnatural light on the horizon. And guess what this is? This is sky glow leaking out from nearby cities like Albuquerque. There's something truly tragic about this, because for, thousands of years, humans have looked up at the stars and it's made us feel very small in the grand scheme of things. And now you look up at the night sky and Albuquerque is just as bright as the Milky Way, and it's quite silly. There's a real cultural loss there, as well as an environmental impact of all of this light leaking in. So hopefully I've convinced you that light is very pervasive. It pervades natural areas where you might not expect it to be. Well, you might argue insects are declining right now. We've had lights for a while. Like, I don't understand why insects would be declining in response to lighting that's staying about the same, you might argue. What's interesting is that light pollution is one of those things that you don't really notice changing. I wonder if any of you could pinpoint the moment that LED headlights arrived on the scene. It sort of gradually happened, and now it's at the point where it's very difficult to drive around at night. Anyway, so talking about the history of lighting, I find this very interesting. There's a lot of there's very many good books written on this subject, and it's something that's quite fun to think about. It used to be the case that the night was just dark, and if you wanted to go somewhere, you had to bring your own lantern. And if you weren't carrying a lantern, you'd be arrested because it was illegal to be out at night without a lantern. Around 1886, when this painting was painted, this is what Boston Common looked like at twilight. This painting is called Boston Common at Twilight. And you can see, 100, 150 years ago, there were lights. These are gas lamps here on the border of the park. There's not very many of them. They're not all that bright. They wouldn't be on all night. Today, Boston Common at twilight looks like this. We've lit up everything, all of these windows, half of them have no people in them, lights on the paths, pretty much everywhere that could have a light, lights on the trees, they're everywhere. And this is just a sort of, these are the ends of the spectrum. In the years between, we've sort of slowly increased the amount of light in an imperceptible way, so that in a year you might not notice it's brighter than the past year, and yet it adds up. This is the rising tide phenomenon. It's really accelerated in recent years because of the availability of LED lights, which are extremely inexpensive and extremely bright. And for whatever reason, instead of using fewer of them, we just we spend the same amount of money and put them everywhere. There's a weird thing about human psychology. This actually happens with lighting, has historically happened all the time. So one fun example, this is an article in the New York Times that really ground my gears, all about how to light up your landscape in this very subtle way. So including lighting up your trees for no reason, lighting up your flowers for no reason. And one of the reasons they give actually for doing this sort of thing to your yard is that if your yard is dark and you look through a window at night, you're going to see the reflections of your house lights on the glass. Whereas if your yard has lights in it, it will break that reflection and you can see out into the yard and see those lights. I think this is a very silly reason to totally disrupt the habitat of everything that lives in your yard, but a lot of people just don't see it that way. Nonetheless, I show this article to prove the point that this kind of a thing, this is what we call aesthetic lighting, is really growing in popularity at an alarming rate. Over the past half century or so, this has amounted to a pretty linear increase in the amount of light pollution in the US. But once again, it's worth noting that within the past decade, things have really, really accelerated because of LEDs, such that if you, as a child, could see 250 stars in the sky at night, as an adult, you would be able to see less than 100. It's hard to overstate how rapidly light pollution is increasing. So it is a recent threat to insects. It's something that has gotten much worse very quickly at around the same speed in some cases that insect populations have declined. It's hard to like paint a broad picture. I mean, everything, different cases are different, but the trends do align somewhat. So I think the thing that a lot of people think when considering the various threats to insects, weighing the harms, is that light pollution just isn't a big deal. It just doesn't really matter all that much. I would like to convince you with the following few slides that this is not true. This is a bias that we have. Because we often don't see the impacts of light pollution, we tend to think that there aren't any. Before I show you some specific examples of how light pollution affects insects, I want to argue from first principles. So things that impact insects, there's many of them, right? Climate change is a big one that a lot of people point to. It is getting warmer all the time. That is true. It's also true that the climate has warmed before, not as rapidly, not to this extent, but it's something that has a lot of evolutionary precedent. Pesticide use, very bad for insects. It's something that's quite a big problem, quite widespread. But again, pesticides, many of them are developed or associated with plant defenses or other interactions in the natural world. Plants have been developing pesticides for millions of years. It has an evolutionary precedent. Light pollution is different. For all of evolutionary history, the night has been dark, the day has been light, the summer has been darker, the winter has been darker than the summer in higher latitudes. And this has been a very reliable cue. The only sources of light at night have been the moon, the stars, maybe fireflies, and fire once in a while. And so insects and other animals have no ability to adapt to light pollution in the way that they're able to adapt to other threats. They just haven't experienced something like this before. And it causes them to do all sorts of weird things because they don't really know what to do. So the impacts of light pollution, I'm going to go through a couple of examples, and if you want to talk more about it, we can walk through this figure, but I just want to pull out some highlights, some things that I think are particularly interesting. One is the fact that light really interferes with an insect's perception of time. So it interferes with our perception of time too, right? If you've ever stayed up late scrolling on your phone or watching TV, you might feel that that added light makes it a little harder for you to sleep, and there's a lot of scientific evidence in support of this. For insects, for nocturnal insects, it's the opposite, right? So they're used to being active in the dark. Here's a moth shown pollinating a plant. This happens at night. The moth will essentially wait for it to get dark to trigger this important behavior. And if it's light polluted, they might wait for longer than they otherwise would. If it's really light polluted, they might wait forever, right? It can really impact feeding behavior and other behaviors that take place under certain lighting conditions. And in fact, this phenomenon is often used in pest control. So for example, some greenhouses will leave lights on all night specifically to suppress the feeding activity of insects that might attack their crops. And we're doing this on a very broad scale, not with as bright of lights, but it's quite widespread. And so you might expect these disturbances to daily rhythms of activity. This also happens on a seasonal scale. So insects are very tied in to changes in light between the summer and the winter, especially in northern latitudes, especially in Maine. I bet they're thinking about it all the time. So some things that insects use light to control are seasonal development. So here's two examples. On the left here, we have an aphid that engages in parthenogenesis. There it is. And they have two forms. So they've got their parthenogenically reproducing summer form, where they're just pumping out more aphids all the time in order to take advantage of resource availability. And then once the days get shorter, the aphid knows it's getting closer to winter, they start investing in making reproductive males, engaging in sexual reproduction, and sort of paring down the eating machine and getting ready to survive the winter. Similarly, here we have some leaf mining moths that have two forms. So in the summer, they reproduce really quickly. They have many, many generations in which they have a sort of, I forget what it's called, but like a softer pupal case that is just more flexible, and they develop very quickly. As the days get shorter, they know winter is coming, and so they will invest in a more cold hardy pupal case and overwinter as a pupa. And the way they decide which way to go is based on the light environment. So in both of these cases, these studies that I've cited show that when you add lights to their habitat, it tricks them into thinking that it's still summer. It actually doesn't matter to them how cold it gets, because they're not used to using temperature as a cue for the oncoming winter. Temperature is not very reliable. Light, historically, evolutionarily, has been a very reliable cue, and so it's very easy to trick them in this way. It's worth pointing out that both of these insects are not nocturnal. So to get on my soapbox again, not only do we tend to totally disregard nocturnal insects, especially in proportion to how abundant they are, given that 60% of insects are nocturnal, we do not spend 60% of our time worrying about nocturnal insects. Not only that, but light pollution also impacts insects that are active during the day in these sort of developmental ways. And nobody's talking about this at all. The few people that are talking about light pollution view it solely as a threat to nocturnal insects, despite the fact that light pollution impacts humans and we are not nocturnal at all. We also have these sort of seasonal effects, right? So, you know, in Maine, in the winters, I bet it gets pretty dark up there. And some of you may use a full spectrum lamp to sort of trick yourself into thinking that it's summer and sort of pull you out of that hibernation mode to get a little bit more energy. Light is it's a very useful and powerful environmental cue. So there's other things that light does as well. So I don't know how many of you have heard of the way that dung beetles navigate using the Milky Way. This is a favorite factoid of mine, that some dung beetles, you know, they roll up these great balls of dung, and their goal is to get them as far away from the source of the dung as possible, so that they can lay eggs in them, and nobody else will come and take their ball of dung. It's highly competitive, right? And so the way that some species do this is actually they will get on top of the ball of dung, look up into the night sky, find the Milky Way, and use it as a landmark to navigate in a straight direction, to sort of optimize how quickly they disperse. When there's light on the horizon from a city, they might use that as a cue instead. But when there's just a general haze from sky glow, where there's no necessarily foci to cue into and no Milky Way to look at to help guide them, they become very disoriented and wander in random patterns. They don't have this navigational cue. This is sort of one of the most extreme examples, but a lot of animals actually navigate by the stars. A lot of insects will use starlight, patterns of polarized moonlight, different lighting cues to navigate around at night. This may be one of the reasons that many insects end up gathering at artificial lights, because they might normally use the moon as a navigational cue. If they confuse the light with the moon, they sort of spiral into it and get caught in its orbit. There's still up to debate why exactly insects do this. It's probably for a lot of reasons, but it's an extremely common phenomenon that I'm sure you have all observed, right? This is not a good thing for these insects to be doing. This is not a good way for them to spend their time. Not only are they often eaten by predators like bats, frogs, spiders, and other insectivores that have learned to come to these lights to feed on insects, But even if they're not eaten, even if they don't necessarily die from colliding with a wall or getting burned up or something like that, which is also quite common, they're still wasting a lot of time that they could be using doing things that actually benefit them, such as foraging or trying to find mates. And in some cases, it gets really bad. So this is an image of a mayfly swarm where the mayflies are attracted to these lights over the bridge and the way that the light reflects off the bridge. And they end up laying all of their eggs on the bridge instead of in the water underneath the bridge. So something like this could just decimate the population. It's a complete mistake that's really, really costly. Also, for every insect that is attracted to a light and suffers because of it, there's an insect that is repelled by a light and suffers because of it. These don't get a lot of attention because they're kind of hard to study. How do you study something that you don't see at lights? If anybody finds this out, please let me know. It's really tricky. But here's an example. So this is a cave weta in New Zealand where these guys live in caves during the day, and at night they come out to forage. But if you put lights near the entrance of their cave, again, kind of like the foraging moth in my first example, they look at the light, they think to themselves in some way, well, it must not be dark enough yet for me, and they never end up leaving and foraging because they are so averse to this light. Also, interestingly, I don't know how many of you have heard of this phenomenon. Some crickets and katydids and grasshoppers will actually block their eyes when photographed with a flash. So this is a great paper all about how orthopterids salute photographers. And so here's a couple of examples. But I think this points at, I mean, you know, it seems obvious to me that the insects are reacting to something that is disruptive, distracting, or possibly painful to some extent to them. And we'll return to this in a bit, but I mean, just like a lot of us probably don't have a great reaction to LED headlights, a lot of insects don't have a great reaction to super bright light. Finally, the last type of impact that I want to discuss has to do with the way that things look at night. So here I have 4 images of a foxglove flower. So on the left, this is how it appears at daytime to humans. Here next to it is how it appears under natural nocturnal illumination as viewed by a moth, a sphinx moth, that pollinates this plant. Here we have the same plant lit up by a cool white LED. And here on the far right is the same plant lit up by an amber LED, an amber light. So we're pretty smart as far as animals go. Looking at these images, we can tell they're all the same flower. Unfortunately, a lot of insects are not that smart. They don't have very complex visual systems with like what's called color constancy, or the ability to compare colors to like subtract the effect of lighting. They're just not that smart. And so different illumination can make it very difficult for them to recognize host plants, prey, predators, or conspecifics in their environment because they just don't look the same. I think this is a hugely widespread phenomenon, but it's perhaps best understood and most well described in fireflies. So as a primer, fireflies are beetles that look like this, and every trail of light shown in this long exposure photograph is the flash pattern produced by a male firefly as he patrols his habitat, flying back and forth, emitting these courtship advertisements, and he's looking to see a response flash from a female on the ground. So fireflies are incredibly visual creatures. Their reproduction relies on the communication of visual information, in particular, the contrast of their beautiful flash against a dark background. And so ambient illumination from light pollution makes it very difficult for them to parse the scene and for them to see each other, court each other, and reproduce. So this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and researching. And I'll just show you one result that I thought was pretty striking. So here we have, I'm going to show you in a second, this video on the right, are a pair of male and female fireflies engaging in what we call a courtship dialogue in the lab. So you'll see the male flash and the female flashes back. So first they're in complete darkness. Let's see, the male's up there flashing. The female is right in the center of that circle. She flashes back. The male flashes. She flashes back. And now we illuminate the whole scene with a cool white LED, and you can see the male in the middle keeps flashing. The female's in the same place, but she goes silent. And the male keeps trying, but he's not getting any encouragement from the female below. So what's going on here? There's this interesting sort of spatial dynamic to the whole thing. In this particular experiment, we have the male in this chamber up here and the female below. They can never meet because then they would stop their courtship dialogue. So this is why we keep them separate. But it's also usually the case in nature that the male is sort of flying around about a meter or two off the ground and the female is below. And oftentimes our lights are pointing downward. So when we looked at all the data gathered across many videos, many nights, many pairs of fireflies, we saw that males in darkness flashed about 10 times per minute, or 10 flash patterns per minute. And females in darkness responded to those flashes almost 100% of the time. We were only really looking at pairs that are engaged in a courtship dialogue, and that was working. The male was flashing, the female was flashing back. Everything was going great. And then we put 5 colors of light overhead, 2 intensities of each, and looked at how much the male flashed under these different colors of illumination. And we found that actually the color didn't really seem to matter at all. All sorts of lighting made the male flash about half as much. Which is interesting because you would expect that the males see different colors differently, or they might respond to them differently. Well, the males didn't, but the females did. And the females were very sensitive to this light. So, you know, cool white and warm white light, their flashes fell almost to 0. Amber light was really disruptive, so they never flashed once under a bright amber light. And bright blue and bright red light were also pretty impactful. Only under dim blue and dim red light did we see almost any female flash activity at all, and it's still like 50% of normal. It's not great. And so going back to the males, I think we have this interesting dynamic here where, in my opinion, there's this sort of, the males have 2 sort of modes of going about their courtship. When they're actively dialoguing with a female, they get really excited, they flash a lot, they're very happy. And when they're not getting encouragement because the female is really sensitive to artificial light, is no longer interested in courtship, or what may be more likely, just can't actually see him, can't see the male silhouetted against downwelling light. When the female stops flashing, the male gets pretty discouraged, and he still kind of tries half-heartedly, about half as much. He'll put out a flash here or there, but at a much slower rate because he's not getting any flashes from the female. This has big implications for the future of fireflies in this very interesting way, because when we go out and look at fireflies in nature, we are almost always just looking at the males as the males fly around and flash. And so it's very easy to imagine going to a scene, fireflies are out, there's light pollution, but you're still seeing some flashes, right? The males are still flashing about half as much as they would if it was dark. And so you can look at that scene and think to yourself, well, they're doing all right, right? They're still flashing even with all this light pollution. Maybe fireflies will be okay. But what you don't see is the females on the ground not reacting to the males. And if they don't flash back to the males have no way of finding them. They will not reproduce, and you might go back to the same field a couple of years later and not see anything at all. So this is, not to get too into the weeds, I can talk more about this afterwards if you're curious, but this is one of many ways in which light pollution really impacts fireflies in particular because of the way it interferes with how things look. There are also impacts on mate success, where in darkness, fireflies will mate very actively, but usually under light, they're not so good at it. And I can talk more about that if you want, but let's keep moving. So these are just a few of the many examples. There's a large and continually growing body of literature finding different effects of light pollution on insects across the life cycle, across species, in nocturnal insects, in diurnal insects, all sorts of things. And so I wouldn't say that it's fair to conclude that light pollution is not a big deal. Instead, I think what's going on, and the reason that many of us aren't aware of light pollution as an environmental issue, or especially as an issue for insects, is simply because we don't see it. So as an example, this is a beautiful nature reserve by my house. My husband and I go for walks here all the time during lunch or whenever. And it's beautiful, it's so green, it's so lush. And I think it's very easy for people walking around this boardwalk area to think, how great to have this reserve in the middle of the city. How lucky must the insects be that live here, having their little lives. Things must be great, right? And then we, go on our merry way, go home, think about it, not anymore at all. And at night, the reservation looks like this. It's hugely light polluted because of these buildings nearby, which are lit up with LEDs and have big glass windows and no curtains and light up this reservation all night, every night. It's just so many people will never see this. They just won't be here at night. And so they won't think about it as an impact to the habitat that they love.
Avalon, we have one question. Is there a light color that may help minimize these effects?
Great question. So this leads me into my next section. So Dark Sky International, formerly known as the International Dark Sky Association, is a nonprofit built with the, how do you want to say it, sworn to address this issue through advocacy. It was founded by astronomers, but there's lots of ecologists like me who are on board and think it's a really great thing to do to minimize light pollution. And they have produced a set of what are called the 5 principles for responsible outdoor lighting. 5 things that you can do to minimize the impact of your light on nature broadly defined. And it's important to remember that these rules were made up by astronomers, and astronomers have a very particular focus. They really care about star visibility. They want to see the stars. Ecologists, entomologists like myself, were a little bit more concerned about what's going on the ground. So I want to take you through these principles, and we can examine together the benefit or lack thereof of each for insect conservation. So the first one is, this is the worst case scenario, this streetlight over here. One of the reasons it's bad is because it's unshielded. So this light is going out in all directions, getting up into the sky, reducing star visibility. And so sort of first step that a lot of people recommend is installing shielding on your lights so that they are directed down at the ground, at walkways specifically, and not where the light isn't needed. So shielding is very effective. Here's some unshielded lights. Here's some shielded lights. Here's both of them as seen from space. Shielding is very effective at preventing light from going up into space where it will be seen by a satellite. It's because of that going to reduce sky glow, and sky glow has these insidious effects on the environment. But shielding is not really going to help the insects underneath the light, who can still see it just fine because it's right in their field of view. What else do I want to say about that? I still think it's good. And it's especially good if shielding can be used to direct light to specific areas, so away from lawns and bushes and trees and onto sidewalks. That's a really great function of it. Preventing the light from going up probably helps insects a little. It might reduce the amount of insects that arrive at a light from very, very far away, but I don't think it would really do much for the local insects. So the other big one, and this was the question was about, is the big recommendation is changing the color of a light, or what's called the color temperature. So for several reasons, some of which I'm sure you've heard, blue light is thought to be very damaging, sort of to the night sky, to human health, to ecology. So blue light produces a lot of sky glow because of physics. Blue light really disrupts circadian rhythms and sleep cycles for a lot of animals, including humans, because for whatever reason, the way that we produce melatonin is it's regulated by blue light getting into our brain and cueing these various rhythms. And a lot of people also make a great point that blue light and UV light and these sort of cooler colors of light are very attractive to insects. So it seems like an obvious thing to do, that we can just switch away from these really blue-rich lights to warmer amber or red lights. And so here's an example. This light was installed by folks who are like in the dark sky community. This was like, you know, an environmentally friendly solution. I think many things, I have many thoughts about this. Strictly when it comes to color, like it is true. So this, sorry, we're missing some labels here. But this black line here is a measure of how sensitive invertebrates are to different colors of light. So they're really sensitive to UV, less so to blue, pretty sensitive to green, and then they're not all that sensitive to orange or red light. This includes insects. Insects are not very good at seeing orange or red. Most animals actually aren't very good at seeing orange or red. And so this would support the idea that by switching to orangier lights, we can reduce the environmental impact of light pollution. And I think that is true. But however, oftentimes people use this as an excuse to just light up everything. They think, oh, well, I have the right color of light, so I can put it wherever I want, and it can be as bright as I want. And it's not really how it works. Insects are less likely to see an orange light, but that doesn't mean they can't see it. And so the more lights there are out there, the more it will impact them. And then another small point, but I have to make it occupational hazard, is that amber light in particular, this orange light, is very, very harmful to fireflies because there's an overlap in the color of the firefly splash and the color of the light. So fireflies tend to be green or yellow, moving into orange, and any lights within this range, including amber, are going to disrupt firefly courtship more, which, I mean, we don't need to change the world so that fireflies can thrive necessarily, but a lot of people interested in dark sky preservation and advocacy love fireflies and use them as what we call a flagship species to inspire dark sky conservation efforts. And so it would be a real shame if, you know, Dark Sky International or anyone was like, let's protect the night skies so that we can protect fireflies and all these other things, and put a bunch of amber lights out and disrupt the firefly populations. So another thing people say to do is to dim lights, to keep them as dim as possible. And in general, I think this is a good idea. However, it's worth noting that insect eyes are way more sensitive than ours, especially the eyes of nocturnal insects. And so something that's dim to a human is not going to be all that dim to an insect. So when people talk about keeping lights as dim as possible, there's some threshold that still implies that it needs to be bright enough for some sort of safety purpose, ? And so that's going to be too bright for insects. So while I don't think we shouldn't dim, I don't think it's as effective as people want it to be. And then the last one is having the lights only on when they are needed. And you can do this in a couple ways. One of which is timers, having your lights on a timer so that they're on from around sunset to maybe 11 p.m. and then turn off. Another method is a motion detector, so that the lights are only on when there are people there using them. Motion detectors, I think, are great. You can't really argue against a motion detector. It's the perfect way to avoid light pollution as defined, light that isn't being used. A motion detector means that the light is always being used or else it's not on. Timers is a little bit more ambiguous because a lot of insects, even what we would consider to be nocturnal insects, are most active right after sunset. So a timer that turns lights off at 11 p.m. is not going to be all that helpful. It will still help the insects that are active a little bit before dawn, so it's not all bad, but it's not the sort of magic bullet that we would like it to be. I mean, if anything's the magic bullet, it's the motion detector. I mean, I really, really believe in motion detectors a lot. But there's also, so that's 4 principles: shielding, changing color, dimming, and automatic controls. The 5th principle is the best one, is just don't have a light that you're not using. So remove unnecessary light. So this is the stuff I was complaining about before. Let's get the friggin' garden lights. Where are they? These people. Gotta stop doing that. There's no reason. If a light is purely for aesthetic reasons, it should not be there. The night is beautiful enough. We don't need to add to it. So that's it. That's it. And so as a summary image, so this is like one that I like to return to. This is a model of environmentally friendly lighting. This is light in a neighborhood that's next to a bat reserve in the Netherlands, and there's lots of impacts of light on bats as well. It's a thing that a lot of people are thinking about. And so these lights fulfill all of the standards, right? So they're really well shielded. They're pointing only at the sidewalk here. They're quite dim. They're pure red. So even the fireflies would be fine under these lights. There's just one thing, which is that they are on and there's nobody in this photo, right? So it's sort of falling at the first hurdle. And I think people get kind of caught up in this like perfect image of like the way lighting can be, when it is so much easier just to turn out a light that you're not using. And if we could only do that, like 95% of the problem would be solved. So to summarize, let me just say, here's an extremely lit up image of people stargazing. I really like this one. This is a stock image. So I borrowed a slide from Dan Jansen's, the entomologist and conservationist, who gave a talk at the Entomological Society of America meeting on insect declines. And he put forth that there are 4 actual causes of insect decline. And that is public apathy, public fear, public ignorance, and science ignorance. People don't care about bugs. People are afraid of bugs. People don't know what's going on with bugs. And scientists really have no idea what's going on with bugs. And what's interesting to me is that the same thing is true of light pollution. The major causes of light pollution are public apathy. People are afraid of, people do not care what's going on at night because they're asleep. Public fear, people are afraid of the dark and they want to light it up. Public ignorance, people don't even know that this is a problem. And science ignorance, a lot of scientists aren't thinking about this either. They go to bed at night like everybody else. So hopefully today I've done a little bit of awareness raising, and you all can keep thinking about these issues and how they relate to your own backyard, neighborhood, and so forth. And with that, I have many people to thank, and then I think there's a few questions. I can take some questions.
Avalon, thanks a million. That was simply great. For Susan and Yvonne in the chat, I think Avalon's answered your questions, but if not, feel free to speak up. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat, but ideally just turn on your video and unmute yourself and ask the question. Trish says, yes, very interesting. Thank you. So I've got a question to start off. A few years ago, I was in Iceland around the June 21st, and there was no darkness. What effect does that have on the insect population there?
Isn't that wild? I don't think anybody has studied this in insects. I know there's a neat paper about like reindeer and other mammals that it's a complete breakdown of the normal scheme. Like almost all animals sleep and wake, go through cycles of sleeping and waking in a rhythmic way. And it kind of totally breaks down under constant light. So their sleep will become very scattered. And yet, animals are able to thrive in this environment. No idea how. I think it's really interesting though, because one, it's kind of like a view of the possible future, especially if we all become nocturnal because it's too hot during the day because of climate change, and we light up all the cities like airports so that it's bright all the time. We soon may also be living in continuous light. And it's also interesting because for me, it makes me question, like, what is the purpose of circadian rhythms? Why do we have to sleep and wake up at certain times? Like, this is a product of evolution of life on Earth, but is it necessary? Seems like it isn't. So why is it so common? Just more questions, really.
All right, if you wouldn't mind, actually, I can unshare so that we can see everybody, or anybody else who wants to.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Susan.
Yeah, okay. I was asking the question, I'm in a condo development and trying to get people to use appropriate lighting. And I think you have to choose your battles and be realistic about changing human behavior. And so I am trying to get people to change their exterior lighting to those yellow bug lights that you buy in a hardware store. And I'm wondering if that's the low-hanging fruit and the solution that I should be spending my time trying to, proselytize.
Yeah, I mean, let me say some more words in support of the motion detector. I think it's really hard to argue against the motion detector if you're so worried about security, which is a very common thing that I hear. The motion detector literally tells you when somebody's lurking outside your apartment. It could not be more safe. And it has all these benefits that it's not going to be on when there's nobody there. They're not all that expensive, and in the long run, in the very long run, they will save you money because the lights are out more often than they're on. I do think yellow bug lights, it depends on, like, a lot of those are incandescent, and so they're not very energy efficient. So I don't like LEDs, say what you will about them. I've said a lot of bad things about them, but they are very energy efficient, which is good for the environment and like good for your power bill as well. And yet they tend to be way too bright. So it's a balance. Like, I don't think switching to a yellow light if all else being equal, it will make things better. But they could be made much better by having the light be dimmer, shielded, and on a timer. So it's kind of whatever people are most open to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll try. I'll change my pattern. Thank you.
If it helps, Dark Sky International on their website, they have a lot of resources, including some stuff about how to talk to your neighbors, which I think it's a hard thing to do. A lot of people feel really attacked when you talk about their lighting choices for whatever reason. And coming at it from a place of like, how amazing is the night sky here, and we should like preserve this great thing that we have, is maybe a little more effective than I can't believe you're doing this and it's coming in my windows and I hate it, but who's to say?
Thank you.
Well, I'll read some of what's in there. There's been an active chat. So Gary Fish says, I've been thinking this is a major contributor for a long time, much bigger impact than pesticides. But that is what you always hear as the cause.
Twice as much of the land surface of the earth is light polluted as is used for agriculture. It's not quite the same thing, but like they're kind of on a similar scale. Like we use a lot of, and pesticides aren't only involved in agriculture, but I'm trying to make the general point. I think that's all bad. I think pesticides are also bad, but light pollution reaches some places that pesticides don't.
River asks, what else were you going to say about orthops?
What was
Nocturnes.
Yeah, I read that comment too. Like, what was I gonna say? Um, such a great question. I have something about oh, I was gonna say sort of get at this idea. So the saluting the camera thing, the fact that they'll block their eyes from a camera flash, gets at the idea, which it's not super well explored in the literature, but it seems obvious to me, that just like when you're driving on the road and somebody comes up with LED headlights and blinds you, stuns you for a second, makes it hard to see the road and see where you're going, this should happen to insects too. And the degree to which it either stuns them or even blinds them in a more permanent way is really understudied. But I think it's a lot more widespread than we think, given that so many insect eyes are so sensitive. They've evolved to absorb every single photon available, because throughout evolutionary history there hasn't been that many available. You turn on a light all of a sudden, I think this can really damage their vision, but is something for a future study, I suppose.
Thanks. And
Thank you
Bob
very
Nelson says, I spent multiple summers working in northern Alaska, and the world is very different between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. The birds get very quiet, and I don't recall seeing any foxes active or caribou in the landscape at 3 a.m.
Yeah, it sounds like you know more than I do. I've never been. I know, yeah, there's lots of insects. In fact, I know somebody who studied flies in Alaska, and I should ask him, like, what's going on with the insects and the timing of insects. That's a very interesting thing to think about.
Any other questions? Oh, there's just a new message came up. Oh, there's a lot of new. Okay. Jan, says I have heard that having lights on at night, but with no explanation associated with the statement. Do you know if it's because of the effect of lights on their prey insects? I'm
Oh,
not
this might
sure.
be it's probably about bats. I'm gonna guess it's about bats, and I'll answer it. So bats are very interesting. They are divided into two groups. There are bats that really love artificial light because they can go to feed, and then there are bats that are very averse to artificial light for the same reason that these cave crickets I discussed, are averse to it. So they are used to foraging in perfect darkness, and any sort of light repels them. And it essentially cuts holes in their habitat where they can't go, and it really limits where they can go because they're very averse to it. So it has to do also, I'm not exactly sure how it falls out, but the diet of the bat makes a difference. And the method that the bat uses to catch food makes a difference. So it's like gleaning bats are more attracted to light, and then other kinds are repelled by it. But there's a lot there. And there's a cool study about, well, it's a little sad, but it's about this trend of what we call facade lighting, where you light up the outside of a building just to make it, this is another of my pet peeves. This and lighting under bridges. It's like for no reason except for aesthetics, but it's very common in churches. And so the study is about bats that roost in churches, and when you light up the outside of a church, it really disturbs them. They're less likely to leave to forage, or they'll often end up moving elsewhere because it's so disruptive. So it's altering their habitat in a major way, in short.
Thank you. And then there's one plug for the Schoodic Peninsula in Acadia National Park has a great dark sky at night, and a large insect population for you to consider as a place in Maine that may be good.
Yeah, we'll see how this summer goes. I'm a little daunted because we're still going to be doing stuff in the lab. So having the field station 5.5 hours away is going to be a new challenge. But it's also going to be my first time actually doing research in a dark sky country, pristine, dark area. And that's very exciting.
Well, thank you so much on behalf of MES. I want to really appreciate this great talk, and I wish you the best of luck in coming to Maine to do some research.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. What a nice
And thanks to everybody. I'm going to turn off the meeting now. All right.